I never imagined that buying a peaceful lakefront property would eventually end with a SWAT team swarming my dock. But that's exactly what happened. My name is Daniel Garrison, and this is the unbelievable story of how an HOA president named Patricia Millstone went completely off the deep end and wound up in federal custody. It all began last summer when I finally bought my dream home on Crystal Bay Lake. The house was located just outside the boundaries of the Sunset Shores HOA, a fact I personally confirmed 3 separate times with a county assessor before signing anything. My plan was simple: enjoy lake life without being micromanaged by a committee obsessed with mailbox colors or lawn height. Unfortunately, Patricia Millstone, the 58-year-old president of the Sunset Shores HOA, had other ideas. In her mind, she wasn't just the head of a neighborhood association, she was the ruler of the entire lake. Patricia, a real estate agent by trade, was infamous in the community. She wore tailored power suits to cookouts, carried a measuring tape on her hip like a sheriff's holster, and had been running the HOA with an iron grip for over a decade. Neighbors swapped stories about her legendary pettiness. One family was fined $300 for having wind chimes that she claimed were too musical. Another received a cease and desist letter for painting their shed in a shade of beige that, according to her, was 1% darker than the approved palette. My first run-in with Patricia happened exactly 1 week after I moved in. I was down at the shoreline, working on a new dock, when she appeared in a hot pink visor and a clipboard clutched like a weapon. She introduced herself in a tone that suggested I should feel honored she'd taken the time. "Welcome to the lake community," she said. "I'll need your dock plans submitted to the HOA Architectural Committee for approval." I calmly explained that my property wasn't part of the HOA. Her face immediately flushed red. "That doesn't matter," she snapped. With absolute certainty, she informed me that the Sunset Shores HOA had aesthetic jurisdiction over every property visible from their community because of something she called their expanded charter. When I asked to see this supposed document, she claimed it was confidential. I told her to enjoy her day and went back to my dock. She lingered for several minutes, huffing and glaring, before storming off. The next morning, I woke up to find a violation notice taped to my door. It listed 17 alleged infractions, including unapproved dock dimensions, a non-compliant boat color, and even excessive water disturbance from unauthorized swimming. The fine added up to $2,400. I laughed and tossed it straight in the trash. But that was only the opening move. Over the next 3 weeks, Patricia escalated her harassment. She sent me daily violation letters, each one more absurd than the last. At one point, she even fined me for feeding ducks without a wildlife interaction permit. She didn't stop with violation letters. Patricia began inventing increasingly bizarre reasons to fine me. At one point, she claimed my kayak was parked at an aggressive angle, as if the direction of a floating boat posed some kind of existential threat to community order. Another time, she accused me of malicious grilling after 9 p.m., insisting that the smell of my barbecue violated what she called the HOA's aroma standards. I couldn't believe I was actually reading those words in print. Of course, I wasn't stupid. I documented everything, every notice, every threat, every ridiculous accusation. A good friend of mine who's a lawyer reviewed the whole mess and confirmed what I already knew. Patricia had absolutely no authority over my property. Legally, she couldn't fine me a single dime. But reality didn't seem to factor into Patricia's behavior. Each time her attempts failed, she only grew more erratic, as if being ignored was fueling her obsession. The turning point came one evening when I was hosting a small get-together with a few neighbors. We were out on the deck enjoying drinks when Patricia suddenly appeared at the edge of my yard, holding a megaphone like she was leading a military coup. Without so much as a hello, she launched into a dramatic speech she titled A Final Warning of Noncompliance. Her voice boomed across the lake as she declared that if I didn't submit to HOA authority within 24 hours, she would be forced to initiate enforcement action. My guests stared at her in disbelief. One of my neighbors actually laughed out loud, but Patricia didn't flinch. She stood there, visor gleaming in the porch light, shouting into her megaphone like she was announcing the start of a war. It was absurd, almost theatrical, except she meant every word. 2 days later, the enforcement action arrived. That afternoon, a black SUV with flashing lights pulled up in front of my house. Out stepped 2 men wearing what looked suspiciously like police uniforms. They had stern expressions, mirrored sunglasses, and belts weighed down with equipment that seemed just slightly off. They marched up to my door, introduced themselves as lake compliance officers, and announced they were there to serve me with a warrant for HOA violations. Immediately, alarm bells went off in my head. Their badges looked like something from a Halloween store. Plastic, shiny, and too large. One of them kept fiddling with his belt, clearly uncomfortable wearing it. When I demanded to see official identification, they whipped out laminated cards and flashed them so quickly I couldn't make out a single word. "I'm going to need you to leave my property," I said firmly. The taller one crossed his arms. "Sir, you're resisting lawful HOA enforcement. If you don't comply, we'll be forced to call for backup." Before I could respond, my neighbor Roger Blackwell walked over. Roger is a retired sheriff's deputy, and the second he saw them, he froze. Then his eyes narrowed. "Those aren't real cops," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I'm calling 911. The two officers panicked instantly. They exchanged nervous glances, muttered something under their breath, and bolted back to their SUV. Tires screeched as they sped off down the road. What they didn't realize was that Roger had already snapped a photo of their license plate. Within minutes, the Royal Police Department arrived. Roger provided a full statement, calmly explaining everything he had witnessed. The officers took his account seriously, especially after I handed over my growing folder of violation notices and Patricia's so-called final warning. It didn't take long for investigators to track the SUV back to Patricia's nephew, Todd, and his buddy Marcus, both in their early 20s, both unemployed, and both apparently gullible enough to believe Patricia's fantasy about having legal authority. They had ordered police costumes online, bought a few cheap props to make themselves look official, and showed up at my house convinced they were doing the community a service. And here's the most insane part. They genuinely believed Patricia had the power to deputize them as HOA enforcement officers.